Today on CityCast Chicago, CTA and Metro are painting a disastrous picture of the future. How close are we to a new teachers union contract? And we're talking about our favorites on the 1,000 things we love about Chicago list. It's Tuesday, March 25th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago is talking about. Joining me today is executive producer Simone Alisea. Simone, how you feeling? How was your weekend, my G?
I'm doing okay. My weekend was good. This is the first weekend in a minute that I wasn't working on the 1,000 things we love about Chicago list. So I'm really glad it's out and that people can see it and they can read all 1,000 things, probably, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, every single one.
Yes, every single thing is available. As soon as I got up this morning, I went to see it live. I mean, I've seen it in so many different forms. We have been working on this as far back as October, I think.
October.
Yes, we started working on this in October. A idea that it feels like just kind of came out of nowhere, but it also really fit. We were discussing 1,000 episodes coming up. How do we want to celebrate? And it feels like we just kind of threw out like, what if we just put together a list of 1,000 things? And so we're going to talk about some of our favorites a little bit later. Over this weekend, I did put that list down for a bit. I went out to another pottery class, the third of 4 over at Penguin Foot up in Logan Square. I've made maybe 5 ashtrays now of various sizes. I tried to do a double bowl with like ashtray in
with
the
middle.
Thing
inside so you could, yeah.
So that's how I spent my weekend. And I did build the Lego DeLorean from Back to the Future. I want to show it to you.
Oh my goodness. It doesn't even look like Lego.
It's also like a functional, you can move the wheels on the bottom into flight mode.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So that's how I spent my weekend, pottery building the car. And now we are here to do what we do every Tuesday, which is talk about some big stories we didn't get to last week. And we have to start with this picture that's being painted by the Regional Transit Authority, which, if people don't remember, not only includes Chicago, CTA, Metro, PACE. We have been talking about this forthcoming $700 million fiscal cliff for what feels like almost a couple of years now. Throughout the pandemic, we know that the decline in ridership at all of these deeply impacted the pockets of these agencies. We also know that COVID-19 relief funding was eventually going to run out, but we never really talked about what could that look like. And last week, they released a report that started to give us a sense of what would falling off of that cliff mean. And Simone, like, I know it's coming from the people who want the money, so they should probably paint the scariest picture possible. But this one is hella bleak. Like, feels like a collapse of our regional transit systems.
Pretty much. So according to RTA, the top line sort of number here is cuts to service by 40% in 2026. A year from now, everything's just 40% off the top.
Off the top. 40% off the top.
That's kind of what they're painting here. And then you start to get down into the breakdown of like by agency, what they predict this would mean. And it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Let's start with CTA. What could a 40% reduction look like?
We're talking about suspending service on half of the L lines, on half of the train lines, looking at reduction of buses by 60%. And on top of that, whatever is remaining, the frequency of those buses and trains would go down by 25%. There was some comparison to like, if those cuts went through the way the RTA says they would, we would have fewer buses than, say, Madison, Wisconsin, a city that is 10% the size by population of the city of Chicago.
Could you imagine waking up and 74 out of 127 CTA lines just eliminated, impacting 500,000 people immediately? And like, I think we have talked enough on the show about how critical public transit is, how critical we have been of public transit. And like, we don't want ghost buses. We want things to come on time and be reliable. But if you just woke up and nearly half of the buses were just out of operation, I couldn't imagine that.
Yeah, it's essentially, as you describe, a dismantling, a destruction. Like it would pretty much turn Chicago from a city with, historically a pretty well running, robust public transit system
It'd
to
be a shell of its former self. And again,
absolutely.
having already seen what it looks like in a neighborhood in which a green line stop, maybe just one green line stop disappears. I'm thinking about the Inglewood green line stop. Like how long neighbors have demanded, asked, begged the city to bring this back, because what it could just mean for the people in walking distance of that one line. Imagine, like you said, half of the lines seeing suspended services, all 8 of them having reduced frequency. You talk about a 10 to 15 minute wait. They're saying no, closer to like 30, 40 minutes.
It is shocking given how much we've already asked of CTA and how much people are already demanding and improvements that people are already sort of clamoring for, how much worse this would be. On top of the cuts to the actual transit, you also have some of the knock-on effects. So, right, if you're getting rid of all these lines, you're firing a lot of people. That is going to have big consequences for employment in Chicago. Not just that. If you are reducing the amount of transit, that reduces people's ability to get to work.
Yep.
This could have really massive economic impacts beyond just the direct cuts to transit. For Metra, you're looking at eliminating early morning, late evening trains, reduced frequency of weekday and weekend trains.
Getting rid of the entire Metro Electric Blue Island branch.
Yeah, like those cuts also pretty substantial. Metro is already not running as frequently as CTA, right? More of a commuter line anyway. So kind of any cuts to frequency there are going to be felt. And then Pace, you're looking at eliminating all weekend bus services. You could eliminate late night service. And when by late night, I mean after 8 p.m. From dozens of routes. And you could see wait times like increasing to 30 to 60 minute waits between buses. Again, the picture they're painting here is bleak. So they have this cliff, this fiscal cliff, 770 million plus. So that's just to fill the gap. But RTA is calling for a $1.5 billion investment from the state. They say the state funds them at a much lower rate than other states are funding. And they're saying, hey, you need to kind of, if you want this to continue, if you want, Chicagoland to maintain its robust transit system, you need to sort of reverse this pattern of underfunding that has developed over decades, over generations. It's interesting because for their part, lawmakers and the governor haven't really gotten anywhere.
Doesn't feel like this has been top of agenda in the legislative session thus far.
It's interesting. We pointed out that it wasn't in Governor Pritzker's budget address that he gave in February. That address was mostly about balancing the budget. It was about, there are cuts that he has to make because the state is facing a budget gap, but transit wasn't mentioned at all. There was no new state funding for public transit in his budget proposal. What we are seeing are these proposals that have to do with sort of the governance of transit around Chicagoland, right? So potentially abolishing the RTA, creating this new mobile mobility authority, which would kind of consolidate CTA, Metra, and Pace as well. Right now, the way it works is like CTA, Metra, Pace, they have their own budgets. They operate independently. RTA has some fiscal oversight, but they're kind of more or less separate things. There is also another proposal to essentially strengthen the RTA in its regional oversight to sort of allow it to guide more cooperation among the different agencies. But there hasn't been a plan, a really concrete one for new funding. Some people are pointing to a new road usage charge, which has been floated, this idea of charging vehicles per mile traveled, a bump to the region's sales tax. I don't think anyone's going to like that idea. Nobody wants a higher sales tax with prices being what they are already. But that's another idea. They're just, so far, we haven't really seen any big proposals to fund what's going on here. And I think it's safe to say that a lot of it is potentially real. Like, there's going to be cuts if they can't find the money. If you don't fill a budget gap, there will be cuts. Will it be quite this scary?
Right.
It's hard to say.
This is definitely worst case scenario, but I think it is important for the current interim leadership at CTA, for Mayor Brandon Johnson and City Council, I think, to further not only educate Chicagoans of this pending cliff, but if some of these cuts were to come to fruition, this isn't just about people losing their job in the interim at CTA or Metro or it getting less convenient. Like, this would widen the wealth gap in our city. This would lead to more people being unemployed. This will exacerbate our unhoused crisis. Like, public transit touches so much. It will widen the health gap when you think about how many people need reliable public transit for medical emergencies or primary care visits. Like, this would make our city less safe, more inequitable, and I think threatens. I can't imagine that CTA dealing with a 40% cut and a red line extension still being sort of pushed through and prioritized happening simultaneously. And so I think this is a moment in which our city is at the risk of potentially taking some really dangerous steps backwards if we allow our public transit system to get even more wrecked.
It's so funny when you read the stories, everyone is describing it as this sort of slow moving crisis. Mm-hmm. Everyone has known this has been coming, but this is the first time that the RTA, CTA, Metro, and PACE are spelling out what the cuts could look like. And in fact, they're going to do more of that this week at the RTA's board meeting, where they're going to present, even more details on what these potential cuts could look like. Mm-hmm. And so certainly something we will be watching during this legislative session. I really can't imagine that Springfield is going to let this go.
They can't just ignore this. They can't. That meeting is 9 a.m. this Thursday. The public can attend either in person downtown or virtually. The last thing I wanted to say here is one thing advocates wanted to make clear. It is much easier to cut things than it is to restore them. So it would behoove them to get on this sooner rather than later. You don't want cuts to happen, the public to get absolutely enraged, right? And this becomes sort of a front page crisis story for you to start like taking steps towards solutions. You should probably get in front of this now. We're almost there.
I will also say the one thing that Pritzker has mentioned is that in addition to any kind of, potential increase in state funding, he is suggesting that there should also be changes at the fare box. Basically, it's going to cost more for you to ride the CTA Metro PACE. Be on the lookout for that as well.
You know me, I've always got a book or two or three I'm either reading or suggesting. And we will always pull for the local independent Chicago bookstores. But hey, I get it. With busy schedules, shopping online can be convenient. And with bookshop.org, you don't have to choose. Bookshop.org lets you choose an independent bookstore or an organization to order from, and your purchase directly supports them. I'm sitting right here looking at their map right now, and they got some of my favorite spots like Burst Into Books in Roseland, Bookies in Beverly, Pilsen Community Books, Women and Children First in Andersonville, and so many more. So whether you're looking for something to help you understand the world or you're just looking for a fun spring break read, bookshop.org can help you find the perfect book and support these community institutions at the same time. Plus, if you use code CityCast, you'll get 15% off your next order at bookshop.org. I'm about to use it right now. Speaking of budgets, speaking of fast approaching deadlines, last week, Mayor Brandon Johnson called a meeting at City Hall featuring CTU President Stacey Davis Gates, School Board President Sean Harden, CPS CEO Pedro Martinez. I always pause there because I'm like, for now. And Alderman Jason Irvin of the 28th, who is also the chair of the City Council's Budget Committee. Kobe, why did he call them? Well, because after a year plus of negotiations, the mayor is trying his damnedest to broker a deal between CTU, CPS, that's the Chicago Teachers Union, Chicago Public Schools, to prevent a work stoppage, get a budget amendment through the school board to pay for the eventual contract, and of course, a pesky pension payment, which we have covered ad nauseum on the show. And yet we ended last week with no deal and no vote, Simone. And he needs to be reimbursed for that pension payment by March 31st, next Monday. And we are at that point where a strike, while still highly unlikely, is more possible now than it was, a couple of months ago. So where are we?
Okay, so let's start with the pension payment, actually,
Gotcha.
because this has just been the stickiest, kind of element, and frankly, it's I think kind of the thing that, when you get right down to it, is the thing that led to Pedro Martinez losing his job, right? Getting that vote and saying that we're firing him. As a reminder, this is a pension payment that includes non-teaching CPS staff, but it's a municipal pension fund, i.e. it is the responsibility of the city. The city did cover this at one point, then it became CPS's responsibility. We're talking, administrations ago. And then during this last, budget negotiation for CPS, which, as we recall, happened last summer, that is when, what are we, 3 boards ago now, voted on CPS's budget for the year. They said, hey, we cannot take on this pension payment and pay for whatever is going to come out of a new CTU contract. At that point, we really didn't know it was going to be in the contract. But, the assumption was it was going to include some, certainly, pay increases. It was going to cost more than it's costing currently.
Regardless of what's in the details, it's going to cost you more money. And when they passed their budget, that figure, whatever it was going to be, was not factored in.
Neither the contract nor
the pension payment.
Martinez said, we're not going to pay this. Johnson, you pay it. And Johnson was like, you need to pay this. Like, take out a loan. And Martinez was like, I can't take out a loan. Like, what? Our credit is like barely okay as it is. Like, this is going to be a problem.
Then Johnson was like, okay, then how about you step down? And apparently Pedro was like, no. And so Johnson was like, I'm going to go to the school board. And the school board was like, we don't want to do it. He was like, well, all y'all got to leave too.
Right. So then we replaced the school, and we know the rest, right? Replaced the school board. New school board voted to fire Martinez. And now we have the elected school board that was sat in January. And so that leads us to, the city had covered this $175 million pension payment, and they're asking for a reimbursement. And if they don't get
to balance the budget,
to balance the 2024 budget, to balance last year's budget. And if they don't do that if they don't get this payment or the agreement by March 31st, then Mayor Johnson's 2024 budget ends up in the red, which is not supposed to happen. That's not good. We don't like that.
And is it safe to assume at this point, since we're so close to this clock striking midnight, it feels like the contract and this budget amendment vote are now married together?
They are now. So that was sort of on Thursday last week. The school board, the 21 person, partly elected school board, was supposed to vote on a budget amendment that would include this reimbursement to the city. They ended up postponing that vote. And the sort of given reason was that CPS and CTU were really, really close to a deal.
Why amend the budget twice when you can amend it once?
And like, why don't we take, if they're close to a deal, we can take this all under consideration. We want to see what the contract is going to cost us before we, address this pension payment. But of course, after that announcement was made, CPS and CTU, not only did they not come to a deal, but the union announced that they were going to be convening a meeting of their House of Delegates, which is sort of, could potentially go toward a strike authorization vote. Again, there are lots of reasons why that's like kind of unlikely. A lot of it having to do with like the relationship between CTU and Mayor Johnson, and nobody wants
to stop
nobody
this, especially
wants
not
a work stop.
Damn near when it's April, y'all.
Yeah,
almost at the crib for summer.
Nobody really wants this, but
it sounds like they are closer, according to some of our education friends over at BEZ. Sounds like the school district returned to the bargaining table with new proposals on planning time for teachers, that extra pay for veteran educators, but they still seem split on the frequency of evaluations for some teachers. They say that's the third and final outstanding issue. And so It does feel that we are closer, but I mean, at this point, do we think we're going to have a deal by Friday, the weekend? Is this a Monday morning Hail Mary?
I think anything could happen given that we fired the CEO on the Friday before Christmas. Like, there's clearly
did happen.
That did happen. Anything, who knows? We shall see. And also, I think, too, with a lot of this budget stuff, it's interesting because we just talked about the CTA and sort of like, hey, if you don't get this money in 2026, these cuts are coming. That's what the RTA is saying. If these deadlines aren't hit, does that actually result in the equivalent of service cuts, right? Like, does this mean that like something goes away, or is this just kind of on paper, this is what it looks like? Does it just affect either the city's or CPS's like credit rating? Like, it's a little unclear to me kind of what the material effects of missing this deadline are.
One thing the school board did approve during that meeting is they are bringing back the requirement that the next leader of the Chicago Public School has a superintendent's license. And so it seems that like they are at least in some ways aligned on what they see as potentially some of the priorities, what they want out of their next leader. But I think this story is the CTA as well. This story is such a good example of that constant tension and pressure between like, what can we realistically achieve? We know right now between the teachers union and some of these school board members, there is this belief that we should be reinvesting in neighborhood schools, expanding services, thinking about the wraparound life of young people in these schools. And yet all of these things cost money. And like the nitty gritty of getting pension payments in, making sure the budget is balanced, and that tension between trying to advocate for like increased investments, whether it's from the state or the federal government, not coming no time soon. Like, this story really, I think, in a lot of ways highlights that push and pull between like what is possible and what has to happen today to keep the lights on.
Both stories are also about intergovernmental negotiation and tension and sort of what happens when you have different layers of government mixing, right? With the CTA, you have, again, we talked about the way that RTA, CTA, Metro, PACE kind of interact. And then the fact that you have the state that's kind of on top of that, similarly here, like CPS is a sister agency to the city of Chicago. It has its own governing system, its own taxing body, right?
Like, think about all those people who have to sit at the table at the same time: school board, teachers union, city hall, city council,
and the state on top of that. You know what I mean?
And they're all in there like, hey, if we had more money for the state, this would be a lot easier, but we don't have that money. Yes, the layers, what each person wants at the table, and depending on who's there, how willing are parties to hold out for increased leverage. And I think in this case with CPS versus CTU, I think the Chicago Teachers Union still has and recognizes how much leverage they have. And I think the looming pressure of what a worker stoppage could look like for this administration and for this school board, I think has kept everyone at the table in a way that is urgent, but very, very tense. I read a lot of those articles that everyone left that meeting with a look on their face that was not fun. That was not fun.
Props to all of our education reporters in Chicago and our transportation reporters in Chicago, because it is a rough time for the both of you.
We started this episode talking about some of the obsession we have put into this 1,000 Things We Love About Chicago list over the last, 5 months now? Simone, you more than anybody have probably spent the most time with this list. What was it like for you to not only coordinate it, but after seeing 1,000 things 1,000 times, what are some of the things that stick out for you? What are some of your favorites?
Yeah, so just a little behind the scenes, a little peek behind the curtain. We started in October kind of collecting them and putting them in a list, and then opened it up to the audience a little bit later. And I think the thing that it was so cool to see the different kind of themes and like the stuff that came out over and over again from people, especially when we opened up to the audience and like they were seeing a lot of the same things that we were seeing. So like the thing I think about all the time is there are like 5 or 6 different entries that say something to the effect of, I love how easy it is to build community here. I love how friendly people are. I love how kind people are. I love how hard we ride for each other. Again, you see this sentiment that Chicagoans care about Chicago and really care about the people of Chicago, and that we are kind of all in it together. And it was something that I noticed when I first moved to Chicago, and it was like one of the reasons I wanted to stay. Like, I do feel like it is different compared to other big cities, but just anywhere, frankly. Like, it is such a unique and refreshing way to exist, particularly in a big city, to know sort of on a fundamental level. May not always agree, but like at the end of the day, like, Chicagoans have Chicago's back, and that is it's so cool to see.
Now, trying to add something to this list every single day was difficult. I think one of the things I love about it is I think you could have like an infinite version of this list. There are things that for some people they'll look on this and there'll be glaring misses. And they'll say it out loud. And I'll be like, I've never heard of that. You have such a deep emotional connection to that. I've never heard of it. And in the same way, I know that people are going to read through this list and there are parts of it that they've never visited, they've never seen, they've never tasted. And there are some very specific things on here. Like, one of the last things I added was seeing Asha Omega and Achilles at Ramova Theater. That was a show that happened, I think, last month. Right. And it's a thing that maybe 100 people went to. But there are open mics and comedy shows and restaurants and whole traditions that people have in this city that you can go your entire life here never knowing about. I think about like grandparents of mine who like the North Side is like 47th Street. It's like 55th. Like, even getting to Washington Park for somebody who lives in Roseland is an effort. And so I appreciate just how, as I move through this, there are some very like special things that may only mean something to me. And then there are things that are just hilarious to me, like the Katie Got Bands dance. Like, that video came out 13 years ago. Go In came out 13 years ago. And it was young Katie with a little pocket rocket just hitting a dance that to this day makes me laugh every single time I see it. But you may look at that and it may read like a different language to you. It's like, what is it, Katie Got Bands?
Yeah, there are a lot of there's a lot, because I was the one who I did a lot of the ordering on the list. And so there's a lot of like inside jokes for me and me personally. One of them is, while I was listening or while I was working on this list, this particular TikTok was like in my head constantly.
Oh yeah, Chicago, it's the windy city, got a big population, lots of good people in Chicago.
I don't think that many people saw this.
I've never heard this.
I saw it once when it came out in 2022. And it's lived in my head rent free since then. And while I was putting this list together, it was in my head over and over and over again. And so I was like, yeah, this one TikTok from 2022. I think it's let me see. It's number 556 on the list because, and again, that's not for anybody. That's for me and for me personally. For me. Yeah. And so there's another good one like that. That is, I highly recommend people scroll to number 293, the Wilson Avenue Water Crib Google Maps reviews. That came to us from Jessica H., a reader. I'm not going to spoil the fun of it, but you should go click that link because it's pretty funny.
Also, as people go through, there are some of these are hyperlinked while others are not. And if you click into the hyperlink, it will take you to episodes and articles where we covered those things. So like, I'm in the section where we talked about some famous Chicago movies. There's a link to Love Jones, where we did an entire rewatch of Love Jones with Zephany Battle, Man, back when we was rewatching movies, I love that part of City Cast Chicago's history. Y'all, we rewatched The Fugitive with Natalie Moore. Of course, that's number 353 on the list. We did Ferris Bueller's Day Off with Lee John Greco. That's 356. I saw While You Were Sleeping for the very first time. We also watched that with Lee. And so that part of City Cast Chicago history where we were watching old movies and kind of talking about what shots we remember from Candyman, you know, are those buildings still here? That was a really special era of the podcast. If people want that back, all y'all got to do is in mass.
You have to tell us.
Tell us that you want that. That's all you got to do.
And that's the other thing about this list, I think, that is so fun, right? The whole point of it was we wanted to find a way to celebrate our 1000th episode, right? We thought it was really cool that we were putting out 1,000 episodes. We figured, we were like, oh yeah, if we've put out 1,000 episodes about Chicago, 1,000 articles, more than 1,000 articles, like surely we can come up with a list of 1,000 things. And I think that was the thing that was also surprising, was how many things we hadn't actually covered. You know, either because they're so specific, you know, but a lot of stuff that just we haven't really gotten to, or just like we just didn't even think about it until we were thinking about this, right?
We need to do a 90s Bulls, but it has to be like an audio documentary. We need to do our own Last Dance. It can't just be we sitting down with it's kind of be more Cabrini Green style. We need to hear people who was there. We need to hear old clips, but we haven't done that yet. But like that feels like,
I just don't feel like we could do it better than The Last Dance did.
No, but we got to do our version of it. We can bring in Last Dance, but the number of people who put in our sports section, which is number 435 through I think 495, the number of people who put Bulls still living on 90s legacy, or still living on old MJ clout, or people who saw MJ play. I love that. But then we had ones like Candace Parker coming home to lead the Sky to a chip. We were here for that. We did an entire episode at the beginning of that season, the 25th anniversary season for the WNBA. And we were like, hey, we got Kalia Copper in, we got Candace Parker here, we got Vandersloot. Is this our year? And the answer was hell yeah, it was.
Yeah,
hell yeah,
we called it. We called it so early in Chicago media.
And that's the only championship during our entire 4 years.
So maybe it was our fault, you're saying?
100%. That's all on us.
Yes.
All on us. We had the juju. And I'm not talking about USC. And not USC.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Again, it's so wild because the list, as long as it is 1,000 things, and that's truly all it is. It's just a list of 1,000 things.
526, Forest City Mall in 1999. 739, Waveland Bowl. 967, Michael Clark Duncan. Rest in peace, Michael Clark Duncan. Like, y'all, we got a lot of just random on this list. It's not random for any other reason than the fact that they're all, what could group all of these things together other than 1,000 things we love about Chicago lists?
Yeah. So thank you so much to everybody who contributed. We got lots of contributions from our readers and listeners. It has been so great to hear from you. You can always tell us more. Definitely, we're going to have an episode later this week where we're hearing from people. So if you want to be a part of that, leave us a voicemail, 773-780-0246. Tell us your name, your neighborhood, and something you love about Chicago. Even if it's not on the list, it doesn't have to be on the list. It's okay. We're going to build to 2,000, and we'll just keep going and going.
But it's a good chance it's not. Like, we could only do so many restaurants, so many historical figures. Like, you know, we didn't want a list of 1,000 people we love about Chicago. We could have. So
we could have done 1,000 things in each of these categories if we really wanted to.
And so if something is not on here, please let us know. We welcome the debate. If you think there's a glaring mistake, let us know. I think by the end, when we were meeting, I was just like, I'm very exhausted by this. But I think I was very exhausted by the putting things in. Now that I actually see the list, this is undoubtedly one of the coolest things we've done. And I think it is one of the strongest, physical illustrations of how much work and love we've put into this show over the last 4 years. From the pictures up top, which were taken right out of my memory card, to, mentions of some of our friends who've come on the show, like the Tribe, the Best of Chicago list, which we've won, best podcast for the last 4 years, calling people goofy and goofies, 288, 289. I think this is just one of the best examples of how cool this job has been over the last few years. And so thank you to everybody who contributed. Again, join me in thanking our executive producer, Simone Alisea, helping us break down the forthcoming crisis at CTA and Metra, ongoing negotiations between the Chicago Teachers Union, Chicago Public Schools, and again, for all of your work on this 1,000 Things We Love, and so much more, Simone. We appreciate you.
Hey, thanks, Jacoby.
Please head to our show notes for all of the links for the stories we covered today. Visit our website, chicago.citycast.fm, to catch up on our latest articles, podcast episodes you may have missed. You can sign up to become a member of CityCast Chicago and subscribe to our Hey Chicago newsletter while you're there. I can't let you go without some good news. Orchestra Noir is coming back to the Harris Theater at Millennium Park this weekend for their Y2K Meets 90s tour, featuring a brand new show with new songs. Under the direction of Maestro Jason Akeem Rogers, the orchestra will take you on a nostalgic ride with a high-energy concert featuring some of the biggest R&B and hip-hop hits from both eras. The show starts at 8 p.m. I'll drop the link in the show notes where you can get tickets. As always, we appreciate you for listening, reading, bearing with me through that. Most importantly, be back here bright and early tomorrow, or whenever you listen to the podcast. We're gonna be here. Peace. Jacoby, what are you doing? You thought about it right before you said it, man. Just take it.